the book of truth. A book that was added to about 2,000 years ago, and from a certain book of a Hebrew physician named Luke, who wrote in Hebrew and we also translated to Greek. And from this book of Acts, we find a picture of the works, the practices of the apostles in the first generation, of those who received the gospel of Yeshu'a HaMashiach, and by which we can learn much, going back to the foundation of the report, to hear what was in the first century, to eliminate all the deviations and other pop-off brands that began to teach strange doctrines and even another Jesus. So I'm going to read about half this chapter here. Well, 1 to 11. Chapter 17 talks about the travels of Paul after he had been in prison, beaten without cause, and then released because he was a Roman citizen and not being lawful to beat. But during the night he had been part of a great miracle, having been beaten and praising Jehovah. There was an earthquake, and when all the doors flew open, the guard was going to commit suicide because he knew if he lost any prisoners, he was going to be executed, he and his household. So before he went to dive on the sword, Paul spoke to him and told him to stop, and that nobody had escaped. And then he began to wash the wounds, and he and his whole household received the gospel, the understanding, knowledge of Yeshu'a HaMashiach, and the gift of salvation from Jehovah. Now again, from the 17th, I'm reading from the New King James Bible, plain English. It says, "Now when they had passed through Amphipolis and Apollonia, they came to Thessalonica, where there was a synagogue of the Jews." Now I've stopped and say that everywhere the apostles went, they first went to the Jews. Whether it was in India, in Greece, all throughout the world there was Jewish populations, and they always went first to the Jews, speaking in their native Hebrew, and afterward the Gentiles would hear the report. And so he came to Thessalonica, with the synagogue of the Jews, and then Paul, as his custom was, went into them, and for 3 Sabbaths reasoned with them from the scriptures, explaining and demonstrating that Christ had to suffer and rise again from the dead, and saying, "This Jesus whom I preach to you is the Christ." Now, in the interest of those waiting for the bus, I'm going to cut the reading short and get to the message. And so I'm going to skip on down here to the 11th verse. It says, talking about when he went to another city. Again, we're talking about the practices of the Apostle Paul. And he says he went to another city, and these were more fair-minded than those in Thessalonica, in that they received the word with all readiness and searched the scriptures daily to find out whether these things were so. And what my king was impressing upon me to preach today, to underscore this message that he spoke on the Sermon on the Mount, saying, "Do not say he came to do away with the law." He did not come to do away with the Torah, or the prophets. He came to uphold. And here we find in the book of Acts this evidence that the scriptures were the basis of the gospel of Yeshu'a HaMashiach. Because there were no gospels, there was no epistles, there were no, not even the book of Revelation, there was no this, what we call the New Testament, published yet. And so the only scriptures that were read that hold of this great salvation that came in the person of Jehovah, in the person of Yeshu'a HaMashiach, in the person of Yeshua ben Elyon, who we call Jesus the Son of God, in plain English. And so, when Paul began to testify that behold, it's in the scriptures, he probably opened up to Isaiah and talking about how he was crucified, although he was blameless, had broken no law. But that when we receive this atonement that came through his offering, when he went to the cross, went to a grave, and then was raised from the dead after the third day, that his pleasure is made full in our redemption, that because of our salvation from eternal damnation, Father is pleased and his Son, his purpose fulfilled, and so his joy is filled with your salvation and mine. This is all in what we call the Old Testament. The scriptures never passed away. Yeah, I'm reiterating again from the 17th chapter of Acts, we find the evidence that the whole basis of the gospel, you find the scriptures from Bereshit to Malachi, from all the prophets, the Torah and the prophets spoke of the gift of the Most High, that we should be saved. Now, I'm cutting the message short now because everybody's gotten on the bus and gone home. Shalom.